Elvis Presley had faced screaming crowds, ruthless critics, and crushing expectations. But nothing prepared him for the night. He stood face to face with his own father and realized some wounds don't come from strangers. It wasn't a public fight. There were no witnesses, no headlines, just a quiet room, raised voices, and words that could never be taken back. What really happened during the argument between Elvis and his father, Vernon Presley? Why did Elvis carry the weight of that conversation for the rest of his life? Stay with us until the end, because this story reveals a side of Elvis Presley few ever talk about, and a regret he never fully let go. The house was quiet when Elvis walked in. Too quiet. Graceland often felt alive. Footsteps, voices, music drifting from somewhere in the halls. That night, it felt stiff, like everyone inside was holding their breath. Vernon Presley sat at the dining table. Paper spread out in front of him. Bills. Documents. Numbers that never seemed to stop multiplying. Elvis noticed them immediately. "You still up?" Elvis asked, loosening his jacket. Vernon looked up. "Yeah, been waiting on you." The tone was neutral. Careful. Elvis sat down across from him, rubbing the back of his neck. He was tired, not physically, but in a way that made every conversation feel heavier than it should. "What's going on?" Elvis asked. Vernon slid a paper toward him. Another expense. Another decision made in Elvis's name. Elvis scanned it, jaw tightening. "Why am I just seeing this now?" he asked. Vernon sighed. "Because you don't like dealing with it. You never have." Elvis looked up sharply. "That don't mean I don't care." Vernon folded his hands. "You don't show it." The words landed harder than either of them expected. Elvis leaned back in his chair. "I've been carrying this family since I was a kid," he said quietly. "Every roof, every meal, every bill." "I know that," Vernon replied, "and I'm grateful, but—" Elvis pressed. Vernon hesitated. That hesitation was dangerous. "But sometimes it feels like you don't trust me," he said. "Like you think I'm just spending your money without thinking." Elvis laughed once, not amused. "Sometimes that's exactly how it feels." The room went still. Vernon's face hardened. "You think I'd take advantage of you?" "I think you don't hear no when I say it." Elvis shot back. Vernon stood up slowly. "I raised you. I kept you fed when we didn't have nothing. And now you sit there acting like I'm some stranger skin for handouts." Elvis stood too. "That ain't fair," he said. "I never said that." "But you meant it," Vernon replied. "I can hear it." Elvis felt something twist inside his chest. All his life, he had been the one who fixed things, paid for things, saved things. But in that moment, he felt like a boy again, being told he didn't appreciate what he'd been given. "You don't know what it's like," Elvis said, voice rising, "to have everybody need something from you all the time." Vernon's eyes flashed. "And you don't know what it's like to watch your son carry the whole damn world and not let anyone help him." The silence that followed was sharp and unforgiving. Elvis clenched his fists. "Maybe if you didn't keep making decisions without me, and maybe if you acted like a son instead of a boss," Vernon interrupted, "we wouldn't be standing here like this." The words hung in the air. Boss. Not son. Not family. Boss. Elvis felt the sting immediately. He turned away, pacing once, then stopped. "That's how you see me?" he asked quietly. Vernon didn't answer. And in that silence, something shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently. Elvis turned back toward the table slowly, Like each step required permission from something inside him. He hadn't planned to fight. He hadn't even planned to talk. But the room felt charged now, thick with years of unspoken expectations and quiet resentment that had never found the right moment to surface. Vernon cleared his throat. "Sit down, son." Elvis didn't. "I don't think I can," he said. "Not right now." Vernon nodded once, stiff. "All right, then say what you gotta say." Elvis laughed under his breath, rubbing his palms together. "That's the thing. I don't know where to start." "Try the truth," Vernon replied. Elvis stopped pacing. "You want the truth?" he asked, voice low. "The truth is I don't know when I stopped being your son and started being your responsibility." Vernon's jaw tightened. "You always been my son. Then why does it feel like I gotta earn it?" Elvis shot back. The words came faster now, spilling out before he could weigh them. Every conversation turns into money, into decisions, into what needs fixing. I don't get to just be. Vernon stepped closer. "That ain't what I'm trying to do." "But it's what happens," Elvis said. "Every time." They stood only a few feet apart now, close enough that Elvis could see the lines in his father's face. Lines he hadn't noticed when he was younger. Lines carved by worry, by years of trying to protect something fragile. "I did the best I could," Vernon said quietly. "I know," Elvis replied. "That's what makes this worse." Vernon frowned. "Worse how?" Elvis hesitated. This was the moment he should stop, the moment he should pull back. Instead, he pushed. "Sometimes I feel like if I stopped doing all this," Elvis said, gesturing vaguely around him, "you wouldn't know what to do with me." Vernon stiffened. "That's not fair." Elvis swallowed. "Isn't it?" The question hung there, sharp and exposed. Vernon's voice rose. "You think I care more about what you provide than who you are?" Elvis looked away. "I don't know anymore." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Vernon said something that cut deeper than shouting ever could. "You've changed." Elvis snapped his head back. "So have you." Vernon shook his head. "You used to trust me." Elvis felt heat rush to his face. "I trusted you with everything. Maybe that was a mistake." The second the words left his mouth, he knew. Too far. Vernon's expression hardened completely. "You think I failed you?" he asked. Elvis opened his mouth, then closed it, because the truth was more complicated than yes or no. "I think we don't talk like family anymore," Elvis said finally. Vernon laughed once, bitter. "Family? Son, family don't keep score." Elvis felt his chest tighten. "You think I want to?" he asked. "I just want to breathe without feeling like I owe somebody." Vernon looked at him for a long moment, eyes shining but unblinking. "You don't owe me," he said. "But don't pretend you didn't choose this." Elvis recoiled slightly. "I didn't choose to be everybody's answer." Vernon shook his head. "You chose to carry it alone." That was the moment the argument shifted, from anger to damage. Elvis stepped back, voice quieter now. "Maybe I did, because every time I tried to share it, it turned into this." He gestured between them. Vernon said nothing. Elvis exhaled shakily, then said the words he would replay for years. "Sometimes I wish it was just me again, before all of this, before you needed me like this." The room went dead silent. Vernon's face drained of color. "Is that what you think?" he asked softly. "That I need you for what you got?" Elvis realized too late what he'd implied. "That's not," he started, but Vernon raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "Just don't." He turned away, gathering the papers on the table with trembling hands. "You should get some rest," Vernon added, his back still turned. "You got a lot on you." The conversation was over. Elvis stood there alone, staring at the place where his father had been standing seconds earlier. The words echoed in his mind, louder than any crowd. And for the first time, he understood something terrifying. Some arguments don't end when people walk away. They end when something breaks quietly and never fully fits back together again. Elvis didn't leave the room right away. He stood there long after Vernon's footsteps faded down the hallway, staring at the empty chair across the table, like it might say something that would undo what had just happened. It didn't. The house felt different now, not tense, not loud. Awkward, like a place where something important had been said out loud, and everyone was pretending they hadn't heard it. That was how Graceland handled pain. By mid-morning, Elvis tried to act normal. He showered, changed clothes, put on a record, low, barely audible. He walked through the halls nodding at staff, offering polite smiles that felt practiced instead of natural. No one mentioned the argument. That somehow made it worse. He passed Vernon, once near the staircase. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second before Vernon looked away, busy himself with something that didn't need doing. Elvis felt a sharp ache in his chest. They had fought before, disagreed, raised voices. But this wasn't that. This was distance. Later, Elvis sat alone in the den, phone resting heavy in his hand. He thought about calling someone, anyone, but couldn't bring himself to dial. Every number felt like it came with expectations. Advice. Opinions. He didn't want solutions. He wanted to rewind time by 5 minutes. Instead, he let the phone fall back onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. He replayed the argument again and again, hearing his own voice say things he hadn't known were waiting inside him. The worst part wasn't that he'd been angry. It was that some of it had been true. That realization sat with him like a weight. In the afternoon, Colonel Parker stopped by unexpectedly. "Elvis," he said brightly, stepping into the room. "We got business to discuss." Elvis looked at him blankly. "You look tired," Parker added. "Everything all right?" Elvis considered lying. "Yeah," he said instead. "Just family stuff." Parker waved a dismissive hand. "Family always gets emotional. That's why you keep business separate." Elvis clenched his jaw. "That's not how it works," he said. Parker raised an eyebrow. "It should." Elvis stood up. "I'm not in the mood today." Parker studied him for a moment, then smiled tightly. "You don't always get to choose your mood." Elvis met his gaze. "Today I do." Parker hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We'll talk later." When he left, Elvis felt no relief, only exhaustion. By evening, the house had settled into its routine again. Dinner was served. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned, carefully placed. Vernon didn't join him. Elvis pushed food around his plate, appetite gone. Every empty chair felt intentional. That night, lying awake in his room, Elvis realized something that frightened him more than the argument itself. He didn't know how to fix this. He had spent his whole life believing that effort, generosity, and responsibility could repair anything. But this wasn't about money, or control, or success. This was about a line crossed, not by hatred, but by hurt. And as sleep finally took him, one thought stayed with him, sharp and unrelenting. Some silences aren't peaceful. They're unfinished conversations, waiting for courage neither side knows how to find. The next morning arrived without resolution. Elvis woke early, the argument still sitting heavy in his chest. Like a bruise, he kept pressing without meaning to. For a moment, he considered staying in his room, letting the day pass without confrontation. That had always been his way. Perform distract, move forward. But this wasn't something he could outrun. He dressed slowly and went downstairs, listening for signs of Vernon before he reached the kitchen. The house was already awake. Coffee brewed, doors opened and closed. Life continued with quiet efficiency. Vernon was there, standing by the counter, reading a newspaper he clearly wasn't absorbing. Elvis stopped a few feet away. "Daddy," he said. The word felt heavier than it used to. Vernon looked up, surprised, then guarded. "Morning." They stood in silence, neither sure how to step into the space between them. "I didn't mean what I said." Elvis began, then stopped himself. "That wasn't true. I didn't mean it the way it came out." Vernon folded the paper carefully. Words got a way of landing where they land. Elvis nodded. "I know." He rubbed his hands together, searching for the right sentence. Something softer, something that would bridge the gap. Nothing came. "I don't know how to talk like this," Elvis admitted. "I never learned." Vernon studied him for a long moment. "You learn how to take care of everyone," he said. Maybe that left no room for learning this. The honesty in that stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. "I get scared," Elvis said quietly. "Not of losing money, not of failing. I get scared of being needed more than I'm known." Vernon's shoulders sagged slightly. "I never want to be a burden," he said. "You ain't," Elvis replied immediately. "You're my father." The words came easier than he expected. Vernon's eyes softened, but the distance didn't disappear. "I should have said that sooner," Elvis added. "Yes," Vernon said gently. "You should have." They stood there, both aware that something had shifted, not healed, not broken further. "Changed. I don't expect you to understand everything," Elvis said. "I just don't want us talking like strangers." Vernon nodded slowly. "Then don't disappear when it gets hard." Elvis swallowed. "I won't." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. No hugs. No sudden forgiveness. Just two men acknowledging a wound instead of stepping around it. Later that day, Elvis left the house alone, driving with no destination in mind. The argument replayed less sharply now, dulled by something else. Responsibility not just for carrying others, but for speaking before resentment turned into damage. He realized something then. He had learned how to give, how to endure, how to perform. But he had never learned how to say "I'm hurting" without sounding like blame. And that was a lesson fame could never teach him. The argument didn't follow Elvis right away. That almost fooled him into thinking it was over. Days passed. Schedules resumed. Calls were returned. Meetings happened on time. From the outside, everything looked exactly the same. Elvis did what he had always done. Showed up, smiled when needed. Carried the weight without complaint. But something subtle had changed. Vernon was quieter. Not distant, present, responsible, careful, but restrained in a way Elvis had never seen before. Where his father once offered advice freely, now he paused. Where he once spoke with certainty, now he asked before saying anything at all. It was respectful, and it hurt. Elvis noticed it most in the small moments. Vernon knocking, before entering rooms he never used to knock on. Vernon stepping back during conversations, letting others speak first. Vernon watching Elvis like he was afraid of crossing another invisible line. This wasn't anger. It was caution. One afternoon, Elvis found himself alone in the office, going through old papers. He hadn't planned to. His hands just landed on a familiar folder tucked into the back of a drawer. Inside were old documents, early contracts, letters, receipts from a time when there was barely anything to manage at all. At the bottom was a folded piece of paper, a note written in Vernon's handwriting. Elvis hesitated before opening it. "Son, I don't always know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to keep you safe the only way I know how." Elvis stared at the words for a long time. He didn't remember receiving the note. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd been too busy becoming something larger than himself to notice the quiet ways his father had tried to stay close. That night, Elvis sat with a note folded in his pocket, its edges worn soft from being handled too many times. He thought about the argument again, the words he couldn't take back, the implication that had slipped out when frustration took over. He hadn't meant to accuse his father of needing him for money, but he had implied it, and implications linger longer than apologies. Later, while getting ready for bed, Elvis heard a knock at his door. It was Vernon. "I was going through some old things," Vernon said carefully. "Thought you might want these." He handed Elvis a small box. Photographs, clippings, scraps of a life before the weight of the world had settled on both of them. "Thank you," Elvis said. Vernon hesitated in the doorway. "I don't want you feeling like you gotta protect me from yourself," he said quietly. Elvis looked up. "I don't." Vernon nodded. "All right." But neither of them fully believed it yet. After Vernon left, Elvis sat on the bed, the box beside him. He realized then what the argument had done. It hadn't destroyed their relationship. It had aged it. They were no longer just father and son navigating success together. They were two men, wounded in different ways, learning how not to hurt each other again. And Elvis understood something that came too late for many people. Love doesn't disappear after an argument. It changes shape. And sometimes you don't notice the cost until the silence starts behaving differently. Years later, Elvis would still think about that night. Not often, not obsessively, but it surfaced in quiet moments, when the noise faded and there was nothing left to distract him from his own thoughts. It came back in hotel rooms after shows, in cars driving long stretches of road, in the pauses between conversations that almost went somewhere meaningful and didn't. Vernon grew older, slower, more careful. Their relationship never broke, but it never fully returned to what it had been either. They spoke, they worked together, they laughed sometimes, but a certain ease was gone. Elvis noticed it most in himself. He chose his words more carefully around his father now, not out of maturity, but out of fear of reopening something he didn't know how to close. And that fear followed him elsewhere. He learned how to end conversations early, how to joke his way out of vulnerability, how to give without explaining what it cost him. The argument had taught him something. Not how to speak honestly, but how dangerous honesty could feel when it came too late. One night, years after that conversation, Elvis sat alone in a hotel room, guitar resting untouched beside the bed. The room was quiet, the city outside glowing faintly through the curtains. He thought of Vernon's face when the words had landed, the moment realization had replaced anger, the silence that followed. Elvis realized then that what haunted him wasn't what he'd said. It was what he hadn't said. He had never told his father that he was afraid. Never told him how lonely responsibility felt. Never told him that being needed didn't feel the same as being loved. By the time he understood how to say those things, the moment had passed. Elvis leaned back against the headboard and closed his eyes. He had spent his life giving people what they needed from him: music, presence, strength. But that night with his father taught him something no audience ever could. That love requires timing as much as truth. And when timing is missed, even love can learn how to be careful. Elvis never publicly spoke about that argument, never framed it as a turning point, never blamed anyone, but quietly, in the way he listened more than he spoke, in the way he held certain words back, in the way he learned to carry regret without bitterness, that night lived on, not as a wound, but as a reminder that even the strongest voices can falter when they don't know how to say, "I need you," before it's too late.